Welcome to Econnections. I'm your host, Stephen Smoke, and this week we'll be speaking with Mark Mandica of the Amphibian Foundation. We'll be discussing the Amphibian Foundation's background and inside details. We'll also talk with Mark about how he got involved in the conservation field, his personal development, and some of his most memorable moments. Hello, I'm your host, Stephen Smoke, and today we're going to be speaking with Mark Mandica of the Amphibian Foundation. Did I pronounce that right?
You did. Thank you.
Excellent. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the organization of the Amphibian Foundation.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here. I'm delighted to talk with you about amphibians. It's been a favorite topic of mine for a long time, and so I was always been into amphibians, but it wasn't until more recently, like 10, 15 years ago, that I became more concerned with the fact that they were disappearing from field sites, that it was harder to find frog in some of these sites than it was when I started. It was very noticeable to me. And so becoming a father, it really put things in perspective, because it's literally harder for my son to find a frog than it was for me.
Yeah.
And so that's been a lot of the motivation for starting the Amphibian Foundation, which is more or less 100% focused on the conservation of amphibians, most focusing on species most people have never heard of. They're not aware that these are disappearing from our landscapes. So that's the kind of the quick story, if that suffices.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Amphibian Foundation primarily operates out of Atlanta, but does conservation and field work kind of all over Georgia, a little bit in Florida, a little bit in South Carolina, correct?
Yes, and we're slowly branching out a little bit more as well, a little bit into the Northeast, and we're in talks on our first international project. So things are growing in exciting ways.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So, for the listeners, Mark is one of the two founders of the Amphibian Foundation. So, when was it founded and who's your other founder?
Yes, thank you. It was founded with my wife, Crystal. We founded it in 2016, primarily to specifically address the conservation of the Flatwoods salamander, which is a species in catastrophic decline.
Yeah. So, if I am putting the Amphibian Foundation into a couple of boxes in terms of the fields that you work in and at what scale, I put y'all in a local or regional scale, or at least historically focusing on the species in conservation, but also education about amphibians and reptiles within the Atlanta region. Is that accurate for now? And obviously, you mentioned it's going to spread some.
It's accurate for now, with the very large exception of our educational classes over the last couple of years have really gotten a global. We have global audiences and students taking our classes. Once we moved to online, it really exploded, and our reach has extended quite significantly in the education world.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk about that. So now that we're kind of there, the real dual cores of Amphibian Foundation are conservation and education. How often do you see these work together or clash? Do you butt heads with allocation of resources sometimes? It's one of those things that I'm super interested in because I feel that without education, there won't be people to continue the conservation work after we're done or gone, one way or the other, right?
You're exactly right. And so we learned early on that education is a powerful component of our conservation mission. And most of our programs are focused on kids. And, kids really get it. Kids still have their priorities straight. When you tell children, by and large, that there's an endangered species and what that means, that really hits them hard, and so, we're, like I had mentioned, we're trying to conserve species that most people don't think twice about, and our educational programs kind of focus on that, and also reptiles, which people hate. So we're trying to focus on species that people are in general either apathetic about or just flat out detest. And our first educational program, Critter Camp, was started by my wife before the foundation even started. So we had already had a little bit of traction in the community educating kids about amphibians and reptiles. That really gave us a lot of momentum going into starting AF.
Yeah, Critter Camp is specifically targeted at the 6 to 14 range, if I remember
Yes,
correctly.
yes,
So it's not the ultra young side, but it's not the high schoolers because you have a different program set for them at this point.
correct. And we have
Okay.
different programs set for 0 to 5 year olds as well.
Yeah. So let's dive into a couple of those focuses because when I was involved in the education side, I was in the adult education with the Master Herpetologist program in
Hmm.
2019, and
Mm.
then when COVID hit, y'all shifted to a very online version of this and expanded the scope of the programs quite a bit. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about how that decision was made and what that has opened, and then also how COVID and how the world has shifted has affected the education wing.
Yeah, those are great questions. And
Yeah,
yeah, you were in the original Master Herp group, and that this was a course that was really important, and I just had no doubt that it was going to be successful. We engage with the community through lots of different nature centers, master naturalist programs, and we share a building here with Georgia Audubon, and they do a master birder. And I look at, and these are great classes, but then I can't help but think, wow, it would be just so much cooler if it was just about reptiles and amphibians, you know.
I
And then
yep, that's where I
yeah,
fall too. So
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just as guilty there.
Yeah. And so when we reached out to like Georgia DNR and asked them to give a lecture or two, and our partners, I just had no doubt that this was going to be a really great course, and felt very good about it. But every time we offered it, we would get a lot of inquiries about when are you going to make this an online course? And to my mind, it wouldn't work because you took it. It was very regionally focused. It was very hands-on, and I was reluctant to turn it into an online course. But once we did, we just invited partners from around the world to give lectures on their research or their particular expertise, and it was turning into a really nice class. The moment that where everything exploded was like when you took it, and here generally we get about 20-25 students, and then the first semester for the online class had 250 students, 10 times the amount, and we didn't have the capacity for that, so we had to build that capacity very quickly. But the online class has a more global perspective, and it's also extremely rewarding. It's consistently very meaningful for our students who, the place where I took herpetology, that course changed my life. That class isn't even offered at UMass anymore. It's
Right.
harder to find a herpetology class than it was before, and so it makes it even more impactful to be able to offer like a quality class in herpetology that basically anyone can take.
Yeah, and so for interested listeners, there's both a generalized master herpetology class at this point, and then also a number of more specific focuses, such as
Yeah,
captive breeding and rearing of the southeastern United States.
yeah.
And I'm trying to remember what the third specific one is. I know you've got one, I just don't remember it.
Well, those three are the core adult classes we're
Right.
offering currently, but we are in development on three or even four online classes that follow up with the master herpetologist, because there's so much more great information out there, and there's a lot of excitement from the students about wanting to take more of these classes.
I I'm one of them, so I look forward
Yeah,
to hearing about those as you develop them.
yeah,
So
sure.
we've talked a little bit about the adult education. There's also some informal adult education with the is it Critters and Cabernet,
Yes.
Cabaret, whichever one is the wine, not a
Cabernet,
drink
yeah.
club. You know, although I'm sure Critters and Drink Club would be
Yeah.
excellent also.
Beret. That would be hilarious. Yeah. Yeah, so we try to get people wherever they're at, so like sometimes just coming in and casually learning about these things and being able to it's more comfortable for asking questions, and the some of these classes don't really leave a lot for tactile learning, and that's a big part about what we do is kids learn and they get to put some of these creatures in their hands, and it really makes a difference. I feel like that's an important component that we can provide.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the adults and we mentioned some of the kids' work. The critter camp itself is 5 days, if I remember, Monday through Friday,
Yeah,
typically, and is very, very experiential. There's a lot
yeah,
of going in the woods, looking for
yeah,
frogs, touching
yes.
the animals. How have you seen that develop? Because now you've been doing them for 8 years. Do you see those kids coming back as older kids and wanting to work with y'all or volunteering? Have you seen that sort of
Yeah.
retention?
To quite a large degree, so technically this coming summer will be our 10th anniversary of Critter Camp,
Holy
and
mackerel.
it's nuts. And it's four concurrent camps that Crystal's running. So it's just madness, if you can imagine. And the camp has, there's campers, and if they start young enough, then they'll come back for subsequent years. But then when they're old enough, they can become a CIT, a counselor in training, and then they can help run the camps, and then they can be an assistant, and then they can even be a lead instructor. Where it's been 10 years now, so we had enough time to have people go through the whole process, and so we generally don't have a lot of volunteers that are minors here, but the exception is for our CITs who've really proven themselves, and then we can keep them in our as part of our education team, which is a very dynamic and growing team in and of itself.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So we've talked now education a little bit, kind of some background there. Now let's talk a little about some of the conservation wings focuses. You mentioned Flatwoods salamanders, and I know that you're talking specifically about the frosteds. Have you done work with the others? I'm trying to remember their name off the top of my head.
Reticulated
Reticulated.
bishop eye, yeah. Not as much. They're out further west, so further from our location, and the majority of the current population is on Eglin Air Force Base, and so they are actually getting a lot of support from Virginia Tech and some other groups, and so we're not needed there as much, it seems. And so there is one population that's been rediscovered in Georgia of the reticulated. So that's exciting. But that's
That's exciting.
southwestern Georgia.
Right. Right
And
on the
so
border with Florida and Alabama.
exactly,
Basically,
exactly.
right, yeah, so flatwood salamanders, what are they? Where were they found and where are they found? Because I know
Yeah,
they're one of your very large focuses and your original focus, if I remember correctly.
you do. And
Okay,
as a matter of fact, our logo is a larval flatwood salamander, and so that really encapsulates where our focus was and is. But it's a species that you would have to go out on a rainy night to when they were doing well. You would still have to go out on a rainy night to see one. But now I've never seen an adult in the wild. In the wild, they were very common throughout the coastal plain, the entire longleaf pine ecosystem. So we have partners that have worked on the species for 2 or 3 decades, and I have heard verified reports that there were roads covered with flatwood salamanders at one point, but they were ubiquitous throughout the coastal plain because the predominant habitat was longleaf pine at that time. And so they didn't have to really be particular about where they were. Just about anywhere was suitable. That is far from the case now, with 97% of the longleaf pine habitat gone. The remaining habitat is really restricted to several small federally managed areas where there are small populations of this. It's a black and white gorgeous salamander that lives underground for 50 weeks of the year. So very little is known about this thing. They are gone They were from the whole coastal plain from South Carolina all the way down through Georgia into into Florida and down Florida, and now they are gone from South Carolina. There's a single wetland left in Georgia, and there's two clusters of wetlands in the Florida Panhandle. That's it. Nowhere else on Earth. And so, since they were listed under the Endangered Species Act in 1999, they've since declined by another 90% and are considered at imminent risk of extinction in the wild.
Yeah, so I was doing some research about my region, and the last confirmed sighting that I can say outside of the one specific pocket of federally managed land that I can find is about the mid 70s, like the mid 1970s, early 1970s, and there's like 4 or 5 records of them in November and December, and they say the wet, rainy night, and it's chilly, and they're crossing the road.
Yeah.
So I suspect that that's the only time that people ever really saw them.
hmm Yes, when they were, them like a lot of other vernal pond breeders or temporary wetland breeders are migratory. So on that rainy night, you're seeing them migrating to their breeding pond, and that's really the only time you can ever be lucky enough to see one.
So they are vernal pond breeders, which means that the filling and or removal of vernal ponds has been, or even the droughts kicking in and making them not viable, has been a difficult time for them. Again, background reading, there's some evidence that they also work in, is it cypress ponds, like isolated cypress ponds? Is that accurate, or is that kind of a when the range was much broader
I
assessment?
wonder because I've heard that as well. I've heard from good sources that sites like Okefenokee might be able to support flatwood salamanders. But I think if it were true, it probably was when there was a much wider range.
Right. They were, it might have been less perfect habitat, but necessary when everywhere else is full.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so what are some of the other species you work with?
We started with that one, and then we moved quickly onto two others that use very similar habitat. The gopher frog, which is Georgia's rarest frog, and the striped newt. And that's a species that already was starting with a very small range just in Florida and Georgia. I think there's only maybe a half dozen wetlands left for striped newts. They're not doing well. But again, I just those are two more species that most people have never heard of or will never see.
Yeah.
You know, in this part of the challenge.
Yeah. So gopher frogs are again vernal pond breeders that are
hmm
also relegated to areas with gopher tortoises, correct?
hmm
So they're very
Yes.
much primarily found in their holes or around them.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
anytime you see someone talking about, oh, a gopher tortoise used to be able to live here, but now they can't, just also put gopher frog there, and it's just as true
Yeah.
a statement.
Yes.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, 300 other species that rely
yeah.
on gopher tortoise burrows. But yes, gopher frogs are certainly one of them.
Do you have any other species that you're starting to work with? I noted that you have some from kind of the foothills of Georgia's mountains, the Cumberland Plateau area.
Yeah, so we did start on a project for pigeon mountain salamanders, which is a Georgia endemic species. We even though that project has started, we don't have any animals in the lab yet because the other portion of that we're going to figure out if we can produce healthy pigeon mountain salamanders for sure, but we're also doing disease surveillance of pigeon mountain because there are so many communicable amphibian diseases. If one of them were to get to that area, it could be very drastic for the species. So we're just trying to keep an eye on what kind of diseases are out there.
Yeah. So those are a few of the species that the conservation wing focuses on. And then
Mhm.
there's one program that I do want to highlight for listeners, which is the blending of the conservation and education wing, which is the Bridge program. Could you tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about that and how that came into being?
Yeah, absolutely. The Bridge program, which the full name is the Conservation Research Bridge Program at the Amphibian Foundation, is developed as a 1 to 3 semester, gap year program. for people who want to get hands-on experience like that. I call it the tip of the spear. Basically, all of the fun aspects of my job have been offloaded onto this bridge program. We have an amazing research coordinator, and so these are the ones getting out there doing the hands-on work. So they're the ones surveilling the Pigeon Mountain salamanders for chytrid. They're the ones running the conservation labs, and right now we're breeding so many striped newts. I think we don't know what to do with them all. So it's a nice problem to have, right?
That's a good problem. I know that the Coastal Plains Institute will be glad to take as many as you have.
Yes, they will indeed. And so it's great because these are projects which need people to do them. And then there are people that want to learn how to do that kind of stuff. And so the trick has been matching those two things together. And I said that they're the tip of the spear, and I think it's extremely rewarding work. The program really resonates for a very small number of people, but it resonates very profoundly for them.
Right. Those to me are the two pillars of Amphibian Foundation in and of itself. Out of all of the projects that y'all have worked on, what are two of them that you're the most proud of? And then
Yeah.
I have one, if you don't mention it, that you have to talk about, and I won't give
Okay.
you the option. So if you don't
Okay.
mention it, then we'll
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I can tell you that, well, for the flatwood salamanders specifically, our highest priority, I've been in some way involved in that conservation of that species since 2012. And so working with that goal of like, there was no manual for any of that. We had to figure this out as we went, and it was such a critically endangered species. Working out how to just keep them alive was not easy. And so, and the animals that we were getting to work with were eggs that were dried out in the field and were well past their expire date. And
yeah.
we had to pull something together, and it took almost 10 years, but we cracked that nut and we got them to breed, and we have some of those babies downstairs in our lab, and they're doing well. So these are animals that are going to be too soon, and they're healthy, and it's just
It's
that
just
was amazing. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like that was probably, because we didn't know if we were going to be able to get to that point, and we've been rather singularly focused on it, and then actually having healthy flatwood salamanders, so there's more of them than there were when we started.
Yep.
That feels good.
And that
Yeah.
was the project that I was going to make you talk
Okay.
about if you didn't mention
Okay.
it, because that is
Yeah.
kind of, if you've started a conservation organization that is focused on a specific species, that's like your holy grail, right? Is
Yeah.
you've figured out how to have them reproduce, and now you have to figure out how to get them back in the wild where they need to be, right?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. It was nice to like check that box,
Right.
but it really didn't give us a moment's pause, because the next step was to transfer babies to partner institutions and have all of us rearing up these animals to the point where the models estimated that we would need to produce close to 3,000 salamanders a year to have any impact on
Right.
so the fact that we have 20 babies is great, but that's not that's
It's the
not even
drop in the
close.
bucket, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, okay. So, what's another one that you're proud of,
Well,
or
I
most proud of, I suppose?
yeah, you mentioned the bridge, and I'm super proud about that for the reasons that I just get a pretty regular sense of pride when I see people that are making meaningful advancements for conservation for their careers, and doing it here, and just how we've really tried to provide a place where people can get a foot in the door, get involved. And I already mentioned how much there's never a shortage of work that needs to get done. And so we've already had people come through and have gone on to keep going in their careers. And we get a lot of feedback from people who have been able to get started in this by our programs or through the bridge or taking a class. And that just is pretty regularly fills me with a sense of some sense of pride. Because it's constant. We have 30 staff members now and 40 volunteers that are here weekly, and that's just 70 people right there. That's a lot.
And
And so that's
your
great.
space is not super huge either.
No,
That's a lot of
no.
folks in one place.
Yes, it is. We're only in the same room at the same time once a year, though, for the open house, and that's crazy. But yeah, you're right. It is a small place, and we can somehow fit everyone in.
For listeners, if you are in the Atlanta region and you are available, you should go to the open house at Amphibian Foundation. It's an amazing time, and they'll show you and tell you about just about everything they're working on. So that's an excellent
Yes.
place to be. When is your next one?
It's always the first Friday in December. So I
All
don't know
right.
what that date is right now, but it'll be then. And we'll have a toad kissing booth. So
Ooh, fancy. So we've talked about two projects that you are proud of that have been very successful in your eyes. What's one that you would like to see expanded the most, where you would like to be able to put more time and energy into it?
I think every single one of these projects would benefit from that. And I still feel like, not to harp on the Frosties, the frosted flatwood salamanders, but I still feel like they're disappearing from the wild faster than the progress we're making in the lab,
Yeah,
you know. And so I think we could really ramp up that project, and that would be beneficial. But I could probably say that about all of them.
that's perfectly reasonable. I guess that rolls into the follow up, which is what expansion projects would you guys love to do if you had more funding and manpower? Kind of that if you could get a 30% increase in funding and manpower, what would you like to expand into?
Yeah, thanks. A lot of times I think about how great it would be to have because this is mostly hands-on stuff, and it really wouldn't work unless we had other amphibian foundations in different regions. So I can that gives me a lot of fun to think about expanding to other regions based on where the amphibians need us, and so I think that we'd be able to identify probably quite a few other places where that would be beneficial.
Yeah, cool. I hope that happens for y'all. So, Amphibian Foundation has grown a lot and seen many things. What kind of setbacks have y'all had as an organization whose primary focus is amphibians and is working so hard at all of them? I say at all of
Yeah.
them, but with everything you can really put your hands on.
Yeah. You know, what my mind went to when you first asked the question was, we started AF to work on the frosted flatwood salamander, and because it's a species listed under the Endangered Species Act, the government felt most comfortable if we were an organization rather than just giving some dude named Mark permission to do this. And so because it's a federally listed species, which, if you're on the Endangered Species Act, the government is obligated to make certain milestones. And we were given the impression that they were going to give us some startup funding.
Mm,
And so that just happened to coincide 2016 when the administration changed. We ended up getting nothing, bupkis. And so I see that now as kind of like a good thing and a bad thing, but we had to figure out other ways to get the funding, and we had to get creative. And so, the original thought was we would use Critter Camp to fund salamander conservation, and so since then we've added more species and we've added more programs. And so it's developing as a model. It's not totally great yet, though. I am still a volunteer at the Amphibian Foundation. So I'm one of the 40 volunteers not one of the 30 staff members. And so, that's not ideal, but we're getting there, and we've been able to make significant contributions to these projects that feels very good. I think the money's, I hate to bring it up, but it's one of the main setbacks. Being in Atlanta is super expensive, and we have amazing facilities here, and the rent is astronomical, as you can
Yep.
imagine. and I just think we spend $40,000 a year on bugs. Okay, so just keep
Just
that
feeder
in mind.
insects, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we grow most of our own. These are still we still spend forty
Supplemental
thousand.
insects.
Yeah,
Right. Right. So
yeah,
you talk about funding.
yeah,
How is Amphibian Foundation primarily funded? Is it through the education wing? And then
yeah.
that is like 60% of the conservation wing, and then the other is grants, or is it even more than that? How does that
More than that.
interact? Oh,
It's
yeah.
more than that.
You
The
don't have to give me a number. It's just a,
No,
like,
I think it's important that to emphasize that we do apply for grants, and we do actively apply, and occasionally we get them. People aren't in general funding amphibian conservation. That's not where people want to put their their money by and large, and so then that puts a lot of pressure on us to raise that money, and so that's a big part of the problem. I mean, the research projects don't bring in any money, and the bridge program itself is tuition based, which is not ideal, but we just charge just enough to cover the expenses. So the bridge program doesn't bring in any revenue. It's all a money sink, and it's
yeah,
expensive. So that's where
yes.
the vast majority of our funds go to just keeping those conservation programs going, keeping crickets in the gopher frog bellies and
Yep.
stuff.
Yeah. So that's just really a challenge for all conservation organizations, but
Yeah,
especially when you're not working with a charismatic species or what many people consider to be charismatic. Because I've seen
yeah.
pictures of frosties and they're pretty heckin' charismatic.
They are pretty charismatic. Thank you. Yeah,
Yep.
you're right. I mean, it's much easier to fund bird conservation or panda conservation. So that's just the way it is. Yeah.
So, kind of moving into, you're in Atlanta. What kind of partnerships has Amphibian Foundation developed both with other conservation organizations, but also within the community? So I know that y'all are on a nature preserve in really downtown Atlanta. So y'all are connected both with the critter camp and the adult education. Are there other ways that you're connected and working with the community?
Oh yeah, I think that's probably the main reason why we've had any success is because of all the amazing partnerships, including with Blue Heron, the nature preserve where we're located. So when we were first starting, I already mentioned government didn't want to hand over the frosties to Mark Mandica. They wanted to hand it over to an organization. We found it in August, and we had already had a relationship with Blue Heron because we'd helped them do amphibian surveys around here and stuff. And so they offered to house us for 6 months for free, just to get us going. And like that was so generous, and I can't tell you how much it legitimized AF just having a location that wasn't our house, and it's a beautiful place. It's
It
30
is.
acres, for a city, it's really ideal. And just partnerships in the community are just really vital, so we do a lot of community engagement where we give amphibian workshops throughout Atlanta, teaching people how to identify the sounds that they're hearing in their backyard. And so we have partners come here too and do stuff. And in like our open house that I mentioned, we invite our partners to come in and set up a table. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention is that we have two community science programs in Atlanta so that we can really engage with the community and help them be better stewards of their amphibians. And we have an amphibian focused community science program, but we also have the Copperhead Rescue and Advocacy Program. And I didn't want to get involved in Copperhead conservation, but the level of hatred that our community has for these snakes really forced us to get to do something. People hate copperheads, like the white hot hatred.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and for me, y'all are one of the first organizations that has an educational copperhead with this special dual lined box.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people, that's got to be the first time that they can really get close to a copperhead and see one, because typically
Yeah.
you'll maybe see one in the leaves or it's being defensive, but
Yeah.
it's an amazing ability to like recognize something that you don't usually get to see, right?
Yeah. People, we've made a way for anyone, especially kids, to just get right up on a copperhead and be perfectly safe. And I think that it just really does a lot for just helping them identify one properly. That simple thing is very important.
Yeah, so for clarification, we are not advocating that anybody just wander up to a snake in the woods and pick it up,
Oh,
especially if you cannot identify it. Just for clarification.
yeah.
So, one thing that I know from working with y'all is you push very hard for a lot of representation and diversity within your conservation programs and within your staff. What makes that such an important part of your programs? And then how do you think that can become more integrated with other organizations?
Hey, thanks for asking that. And it is kind of like just more of a secret part of our mission. But we have really made a very deliberate choice to center that from the beginning, just centered on bringing in, making sure that we're inclusive in the way that we can pull in people from lots of different backgrounds. I'm someone who I didn't even know what the term herpetology meant until I was 30. So I was never exposed to those types of things, and I would have loved it. I really would have,
Yeah.
And so just making that available to the broadest community possible while simultaneously saying we've got opportunities, we've got work that needs to get done, and so I think that that has really served us well. And from the beginning, we're able to really attract a diversity of students because it's kind of got a little bit of an academic feel here, and I like that. But I think that we're making some really great strides compared to like where I went to school, for example.
Yeah. So, do you have any ideas for people who might be in an organization and looking to expand that as how they might be able to focus a little bit on that or develop more of that focus?
Yeah, I think that it really is important to place that at the center of so like all things that there's a lot of aspects to the Amphibian Foundation, but they all pass through this. We have at times when there's interest had a volunteer community to our group here at AF to try to take a step back and see if we're being as effective as we feel like we want to be. I would advocate for that too, seeing how we can make more engagement, more outreach to communities where we're not really connecting
Hmm.
strongly with. But I think we can't overlook the fact that Atlanta, in and of itself, is already a very diverse place, and we might not have been able to pull this off just anywhere.
Right.
And so that's just something else to acknowledge as well.
So, for listeners, what opportunities might be available to work with y'all, either if they're in the Atlanta region or potentially other regions in the US?
Mm. Yeah, we have many more available options for people that are, if not local to Atlanta, then it can at least get to some of our field sites. And so that is, we have lots of engagement opportunities for volunteers if people can afford to volunteer their time. We have weekly volunteer opportunities, but we also have much less regular volunteer opportunities. So folks can go to our website and sign up for what we call the special projects list. And so that's just an email list where we'll blast out if there's an all hands on deck situation, and folks can respond if they want to. So it's pretty low commitment. But between that and the weekly, like our collections volunteers have to be here weekly because the training is so intense. It takes 90 days, and so it takes that long to get a feel for the animals in your care. And so, but not everyone can do that.
Right.
Not everyone can afford to do that.
Yeah.
So We do try to have a diversity of opportunities as well.
If you aren't able to be there and volunteer, what would be the most helpful thing that they could do for Amphibian Foundation? Is it donations? Is it exposure? Is it, partnering with their own local reptile amphibian conservation group? What would be the thing that you would suggest they do if they wanted to help?
Yeah, thank you for that question. If folks are interested in helping AF specifically and they're not in the region, you can join us as a member. We have a Patreon membership, so that is a way that you can contribute and get the inside scoop on some stuff. And then if you're looking to benefit amphibians, I'll just say a website. It's called backyard.frogsneedourhelp.org. And that is a blog that I've been maintaining. That link I just gave you is a direct link to every article I've ever written or found about making your yard more amphibian friendly. There are changes that people can make to their yard. In Atlanta, or a place that's super fragmented like Atlanta, changes to your specific little yard could really make the difference for connecting amphibian communities. It's been a joy to watch some of the amphibians return to our area, for example. And so we have lots of resources there for little things you can do, or all the way up to constructing a wetland on your property. So that is just a way that you can benefit amphibians in your area.
Yeah, I'll make sure to put a link to that in the show notes so that if you are interested, you can get there with just a single click.
Wonderful.
Um,
Thank you.
so, if someone is interested in either joining Amphibian Foundation or a similar organization professionally, kind of as a career step, what skill set would you guys be looking for the most?
That's really tough to nail down, because there are so many things that need to get done that I feel like there's a diversity of needs, and so that's going to call for a diversity of perspectives and backgrounds. I never wanted to go to school. I graduated high school very late in life and never thought I'd go back, but then, so there are opportunities for people that don't love school, and I think that a lot of our courses still appeal for people that don't really love school, but then there are people that do love school. And there are some very technical jobs that need to get done using sophisticated software, for example, and so, I really feel like we just started a literary magazine at AF, so we're trying to engage people that have other skills that they would like to apply towards amphibian conservation that has nothing to do with academics or science necessarily.
Effectively, bring your skill set, whatever it is, and a conservation organization will find a way for you to be useful, right?
Yeah,
Either as a
yeah.
volunteer or as a career, right?
Yeah, I guess you're right. I haven't thought of it that way before, but I can't see, like, so far as yet we've been able to apply people's skills towards this.
Last one on the organization. If we have listeners interested in starting a conservation organization, what decisions would you recommend them to take? And the follow up being, would you recommend finding another org to branch off of or partnering with for some of your initial and early projects?
Yeah, if someone was interested in starting a similar organization, yes, identifying the need in the area, because it is pretty local to some degree. Like, our field sites can be as long as 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours from AF, but are generally in the southeast. And then the partners, I think that the fact that we had so many passionate partners that helped us get started made it more possible. And so, if I would imagine it would be harder for someone moving to a new community and trying to start something than it would be for someone who already had an idea of what conservation needs there were and what partners were out there already doing stuff. Because, for here, we had lots of partners, but no one was doing anything specific on amphibians. There was obviously a rather urgent need for someone to step in.
Right. Yeah. So that's all I've got in terms of the organization. Last, there's just going to be some things
Okay.
about you. So the two questions are: what is your favorite thing to see in nature, and what is something you would love to see in person the most that is not adult flatwood salamanders in the wild?
That's not fair.
I know. I'm a dirty cheater that way.
No, that's good. The first thing, the thing that really got me hooked was when I was an undergrad, and there was a need there. They were hiring a technician, and the technician needed to set up and check traps around two vernal ponds for 2 years. And so I applied for that job thinking I was going to have to fight with 1,000 other people, but I was the only one that applied for that job. And so I got it. And I had the opportunity to really get to know two wetlands very well in basically every spotted salamander that went in or left. We had completely fenced these two ponds, so any salamander that came in was in a trap. You could record it, put it on the other side of the fence. So that was in March. And later that same month, I witnessed my first salamander migration. And so I was ready. I'd never seen one, I had only heard, but I was ready. And I still wasn't emotionally prepared because there was snow on the ground, ice on the pond, and hundreds of spotted salamanders coming in over the snow. And I was just, it completely blew my mind. Like, you can't find one of these things for 50, 51 weeks of the year. But I was out in the rain at night in the middle of the woods, and I was seeing hundreds of spotted salamanders, and they were driven. Like, they were really like horny, you know what I mean? Like, they were in the mood for love.
And they're booking it.
They're booking it. They're driven. And man, it was it. And so I've had the occasion to see other migrations, but never anyone as profound as that first one. And it's pretty amazing to behold. You know, you really have to want to see that because you have to go out in the rain in the middle of the night. You know, and most people aren't willing to do that. Yeah.
So, what thing would you like to see in person the most outside of the Flatwoods? Because I'm a
Well,
cheater that way.
yeah, you are a cheater that way, but I think I could probably get around what
Mm,
you were saying by saying I would like to see healthy longleaf pine habitat because there
mm.
I haven't seen that. You know, there are people making efforts, but you know, there's nowhere left for us to even put animals right now. You know what I mean? It's bad out there. So
It's
what I'd
yeah.
like to see is some nice, pristine longleaf pine habitat, just like nature intended. So that's related. And but
Yeah.
was it too sneaky or was that legit?
No, that's
Okay.
perfectly legit. I've
Yeah.
been down to Apalachicola Forest where they've been
Hmm.
doing burns, and I've
Hmm.
gotten to see the difference just from one side of the road to the other, where they've been managing for longleaf pines versus just letting it go.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing sight for even that very small patch of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and then just not to turn it around and make it bleak, but most of those sites are predicted to be under the ocean before too long. You know,
Yep,
so we really have to look more inland.
and
It's
there,
it's just really
yeah.
bleak.
Well, and there was what 3 or 4 years where there was just salt in the ephemeral wetlands because of a hurricane that dumped salt
Yep.
water all in them.
Yep.
So even when you have the best situations, you can have a hurricane that just makes it impossible.
Right.
Yeah,
And I'm sure that flatwood salamanders have had to deal with that historically, but now like that was those wetlands were like the last wetlands left, and they were underneath the ocean.
so you talked a little bit about school and not really being a fan. Walk us through how you got into the conservation field, because I know from talking with you previously, but I know our listeners are not going to be as familiar.
Yeah. So I mean, I was at UMass as an undergrad for sociology and psychology, and you know, whatever, it was fine. But then my last semester there, I took the herpetology class, but I didn't have any background in science, so I begged the teacher to let me in, just pass fail, because I knew it was going to be really hard, and it was. But man, I loved it. I loved it so much that I would run to class to make sure I could sit in the front row. And then I realized in the moment I never did that for any of my sociology or psychology classes. And then I'm like that was very profound for me. And so even though it was my last semester, I added a second degree biology, and I had to do 2 more full years of just science classes because I had already completed all my gen eds, and that was rough. It was so hard, and but I loved it, you know, and I wanted to go into researching how frogs were able to detect and capture food and then transported into their mouths. I still find that fascinating. It's still something I try to work on when I have a spare few moments. And so that's when I was off to the races. I went to graduate school to focus on how an aquatic frog was able to detect prey underwater. Pippa Pippa, I
Mhm.
love that thing. And so it was right then, like when I was in undergrad, we were starting to get wind of frogs showing up with deformities, holes in the ozone, and different problems with limb deformities, and so that was of concern. But really, in graduate schools, when I started really paying attention to what the global scientist community was saying about how their frogs were disappearing everywhere. And, in 2005, I became aware of what was happening in Panama, where there was a fungal, like a plague wafting through central Panama, killing 85% of the amphibians there. And I had an opportunity to work on that project briefly. That's what brought me to Atlanta, was to work at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, which they didn't know what else to do other than to rush down ahead of the fungus and collect all the frogs they could, like rescuing things from a burning building, stored it in a box at
Yeah.
the botanical garden. And that was nuts and scary because they collected the frogs, then the fungus hit and wiped out all the wild ones.
Yeah.
All that was left was sitting in a box in a parking lot at the botanical garden, and that was crazy. So
Yeah.
that really, after that, it's really been focused. Like I said, I'm still very interested in prey detection and capture. I'll always will be, but this is an all hands on deck situation for amphibian conservation, and there's not going to be amphibians to study for much longer at this rate.
Yeah, if you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about the trigger that kind of moved you out of the Atlanta Botanical Garden? Pulled the trigger and you decided that that was no longer something that you were going to be doing, and you, I assume, moved into the Amphibian Foundation near directly.
Yeah, well, that working on those Panamanian species was very privileged to have that opportunity. But once took over that program, I got permission to start some native projects, which were more near and dear to my heart. And so we actually started with the Flatwood salamanders there. And then one day they closed the program. It was very suddenly, and so I was out of a job, and I didn't know what was going to happen with these salamanders. So that was the big motivation, not just to get them set up, but really like how I already mentioned that there are very few people that like are prioritize amphibians or want to fund amphibians. And it's really easy for people to deprioritize amphibians, as what happened. And so that's why we have the amphibian right in the name, Amphibian Foundation. Like that's going to remain our priority even after I'm dead, if this thing is still going, because it was important to not have them be so susceptible to a shift in priorities. Someone can come in and just change their mind about something, and it
Right.
really has a profound impact on the species. Does that
Uh,
answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay, good.
You start the Amphibian Foundation. What are some of the things that you had no idea about or were really unprepared for when you started the foundation?
Yeah.
Because I know that for a lot of people, the first step of starting a conservation organization is really daunting. And then also the I'm working on something that if I fail is going to cease to exist can be really, really in people's heads.
Yes, you're right. And I say there is a psychological toll on that, and first learned about that at the botanical garden because there was one frog there that was the last one on Earth,
Yeah.
and that just maxed the anxiety, just juiced it all the way up. Like, if could you imagine coming into work and not seeing them like right away, like what you're like, where's this freaking frog? And it's just really terrifying. And then those types of stakes are also on the flatwood salamanders to some degree. I mean,
Hmm.
they're heading towards having one left, and it's extremely stressful. So, if have I answered your question, or did I go off
Well,
topic a bit?
I think I
Yeah,
asked a second question that you
yeah.
successfully answered because
Okay.
that is something that I wouldn't have considered when I was starting a conservation organization, really, if I weren't aware of it already. So, what kind of challenge did you find that you weren't prepared for as beginning
That's right.
Amphibian Foundation? That was a
Yes.
start question.
Yes, that was, and I meant to answer that one. I'm sorry I got off subject because the answer is everything. Like I got into this because I liked to be in the swamps looking for frogs. That was my skill set, and now I'm running a nonprofit that is employing 30 people, and none of that is enjoyable. But it's also not something I imagined I would be doing, but it is super important.
Getting a little bit outside of Amphibian Foundation, your whole family is very deeply involved. You and your wife are founders, and I know that your son was very involved. I'm not sure how involved he still is as he's aged up. How do you all balance that kind of work life relationship? Not just if you all butt heads at work, but also kind of you guys are so involved. How do you guys balance that?
Uh,
Or do
there's no
you?
real balance. It's pretty much been all consuming, and so luckily we all still really love to be around each other, and so
That is a
like
good thing.
every Saturday, Anthony comes with us into the foundation to help out, and so that's really good. And so he's 16 now, so that's the age where everything you got to be cool and all that. But he still loves coming in, and that's really great. And he'll be teaching some critter camp this summer, so that's good. And it offers him opportunities to grow as well. It's not the most comfortable thing for him to be teaching people, but he's getting it's an important skills to be able to communicate like that.
Tell us about like two really memorable moments in conservation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind is the bridge program. So we have been a very active partner in Sea Park, which is the Southeastern Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. It's a regional group. There are several regional groups in the U.S. The Southeast one was the first, and it generally gets about 300 people to come to those conferences. And the last two, we've had our bridge students giving the presentations, and that, I don't know, it's very memorable for me. It's
Yeah.
just really, really nice. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
you're able to say, look, these people know what they're doing to the
Yeah.
extent that they're able to present with these other professionals.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and they know what they're talking about, and they're out there doing it, and they're connecting with an audience that values what they've done.
hmm yeah. So another
Okay.
memorable moment. One more question,
Oh,
and then I'll let you go.
okay. Well, memorable moments abound because, as you said, it's a family organization. So I've watched my son. We've just made. I forget how many years it's been, but it's been like 8 years that we've been AF. So he was 8 when he started, and he's 16 now, and it's just been a lifetime of memorable moments for that. And then before that, he would come in every Sunday into the botanical garden and help me there. And so that's just really meant tailor made for memorable moments, just being with Crystal and Anthony like that.
That's awesome. Last question is, if you had to pick another conservation project that's not Amphibian Foundation to work on, what would it be? If you got a reasonable amount of funding and manpower and you had to pick something that wasn't Amphibian Foundation related. It can
I've
be
been
adjacent. It can be adjacent.
adjacent, yeah,
Yeah.
adjacent, because I've been really focused on, and maybe it was the copperheads that brought this to me, but I've been really focused on elevating species that people despise. One of the classes we're developing now is biology of the despised. It's really important to me. I feel like there are so many malign things out there that are just poorly understood, and we have an opportunity here and they're all fascinating too. These are, people love to hate them, but they're also fascinated. Like nothing's more hated than a copperhead. But when we do an event, we get 100 people to show up that either want to see a copperhead, or they just want to see one. And so I think that there's something to that, is turning that hatred into fascination, and I like to point out that even the whole field that I belong to, herpetology, that field was formed by someone who hated reptiles and he hated amphibians, and put them together in a group because he hated them, not because they were alike. It's just like that's how it was formed.
We got mammals, we got birds, and then we got those other things.
And other things. It originally included worms too. It's so funny. Just things this guy hated. Yeah.
You're gonna have to add a course that's just interesting history of herpetology and like
Yeah.
so. It would be something along the lines of again educational related, but targeting malign species, right?
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. It's doing elevating the these malign species through the work that people are doing to, elevate them or understand them better and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. I will be letting you go because we've taken, as usual, more time than I expected. But if you have any socials that you would like to shout out for the Amphibian Foundation or anything else that you think our listeners should know about amphibian conservation in general, here's your soapbox. Here's your time.
Oh, well, thanks. Your questions were great, and I really feel like I've gotten to the big points. So we do try to be as engaging as possible online as well. So you can get us on Facebook, Instagram. We haven't given up on Twitter yet. We're still there trying to put positivity out on that platform as well. You know, and so, yeah, please connect with us there. We do have a monthly newsletter as well. You can get to that through the direct link of stayinformed.amphibianfoundation.org, or you could just go to our website and go to the bottom and you could sign up there. And so, that I already mentioned the membership program, and those are all really good ways to stay connected with us online.
Excellent. And I'll make sure that I have links to all of those in the show notes for listeners that are looking to connect and would like that easy one click. It's been great talking with you, Mark,
Yeah.
and I hope that we'll be able to talk again sometime in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation and for the thoughtful questions. This was really nice talking with you.
Yeah, have a good evening, Mark.
You too. All right, take care.
Thanks again to Mark with the Amphibian Foundation for taking time to speak with us today. I'm glad that we were able to talk with them about their work with amphibian conservation and education. If you are interested in reaching out to Amphibian Foundation, you can do so via email at info@amphibianfoundation.org or the website www.amphibianfoundation.org. If you would like to learn more about the frosted flatwoods salamander or gopher frog and the work being done with them, I've put links to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's recovery plan for the flatwoods salamander and the Georgia Department of Natural Resources information on the gopher frogs in show notes. If you'd like to know about upcoming episodes and give suggestions for guest questions, please check our website or Discord server. Additionally, if you have other organizations you've worked with and or would like to hear us speak to, you can contact us at our email/website or on our Discord channel. Links to all of these are in the show notes. Have a good week, and I look forward to speaking with you next time and developing more e-connections.